The door was locked from the inside. Guard Mason stood outside the ladies' waiting room. He turned the handle. It didn't move. He knocked. No answer. He peered at the window. The glass was fogged. He could see a shape inside. A figure sat on the bench. A woman, head bowed, face covered by a black veil. Mason called out, "Madam?" No reply. He stepped back, looked around the platform. Mrs. Dolly Bantry was walking past. "Mrs. Bantry," he called. She came over. "What is it?" Mason pointed at the door. "Won't open. Someone's inside." Dolly moved to the window. She wiped a patch with her hand. Her eyes widened. "She's not moving," Dolly said, her voice low. Mason pressed his face to the glass. He saw her more clearly now. Still, hands folded, in her lap. Something shiny lay on the floor, near her feet. A silver flask. Dolly squinted. "There's something strange," she said. "What?" "That smell." Mason frowned. He couldn't smell anything yet. But Dolly stepped back. Sweet, like pear drops. Mason took out his key ring, selected the right one, pushed it into the lock. The door clicked. He pushed it open. They stepped inside. The air was still. The sweet smell stronger. The woman sat upright. The veil still covered her face. Her head tilted, slightly to one side. Mason moved closer. He reached for her wrist. Cold. No pulse. He pulled the veil back. The face was pale. The eyes half closed. Dolly stared. "Do you know her?" Mason asked. "No," Dolly said. "Never seen her before." Mason looked at the flask. It lay on its side. The cap was off. A few drops clung to the rim. He bent down, sniffed. The sweet smell. Again. He straightened. "This isn't right." Dolly's eyes stayed on the woman's face. "She's dead," Mason said. Dolly nodded. Once. They stood in silence for a moment. The platform outside was quiet. A train's distant whistle came and went. Mason stepped back. He closed the door, locked it again, from the inside. Dolly looked at him sharply. "What are you doing?" "No one leaves or enters until police get here." Mason walked to the telephone on the wall. He lifted the receiver, started to dial. Dolly took one last look at the woman. Then she leaned toward Mason, her voice almost a whisper. "Call Miss Marple." It smelled like pear drops. Dr. Haydock stood over the body. He opened his case, took out his stethoscope, listened for a heartbeat. Nothing. He checked the skin. Cold. Rigor starting in the jaw. He noted the stiffness in the hands. Mason stood by the door. Mrs. Bantry waited beside him. Haydock leaned down, picked up the silver flask. The cap was off. Inside, a thin layer of liquid. He tipped it slightly. Only a trace remained. He sniffed. The sweet, artificial scent was strong. He looked up. Where was this? Mason pointed to the floor near the woman's feet. Haydock set the flask on the bench. He examined the mouth of the dead woman. Faint staining at the lips. No burns. He pressed on her abdomen. No sign of injury. Dolly shifted. "What is it?" Haydock shook his head. "I'm not sure, yet." He took out his watch, made a note of the time, judged the onset of rigor, estimated she had been dead less than 30 minutes. He stood up. "Looks like heart failure, at first glance," he said. "But," Mason glanced at him, "but." "The timing is wrong," Haydock said. "She's cold, too quickly." The door opened quietly. Miss Marple stepped in. Her eyes moved from the body to the flask. "Mrs. Bantry," she greeted softly. Dolly nodded. "This is Dr. Haydock," she said. Marple walked to the bench, and she didn't touch the body. She looked at the veil, then at the shoes, then at the flask. "Pear drops?" she asked. Haydock looked at her. "You know the scent?" Yes, Marple said. A child's sweet, artificial, often used in flavoring. Haydock nodded slowly. Could be more than flavoring here, he said. Mason shifted his weight. What do you mean? Cyanide, Haydock said. Smells like pear drops. It could explain the speed. Dolly took a step back. Poison? Haydock nodded again. Possibly. Marple's eyes stayed on the flask. Was she alone when found? Mason answered. Yes. Door was locked. I opened it with the station key. Haydock folded his arms. If this was poison, someone gave it to her, and they'd have needed to be here within the last half hour. Marple looked at him. Then the killer might still be close. Silence hung in the room. The train outside rattled past. Haydock closed his case. I'll need to send the flask to the lab, he said. Find out exactly what's in it. Marple stepped toward him. Before that, she said, there's something else. We should check. Haydock frowned. What? Marple met his eyes. Then, we should check the clock. The watch was running backwards. Inspector Slack held it in his hand. It was small, gold-plated. The seconds hand ticked in reverse. He glanced at Dr. Haydock. Where was this? In her bag, Haydock said, near the flask. Slack turned it over. The back was scratched, the chain tangled. Miss Marple leaned closer. Unusual, she said. Slack nodded, slowly. Never seen one do that. He wound it forward. The seconds hand still went the wrong way. Mason stood near the door. Dolly Bantry watched from the corner. Slack looked at Marple. You think it means something? Marple nodded once. It could. Slack raised an eyebrow. Could what? Confuse the time of death, Marple said. Slack frowned. She explained. If someone looked at the watch, they'd think the time was earlier, or later than it was. A deliberate trick. Slack put the watch on the bench. That's clever, he said, but it doesn't tell us how they got in. Haydock closed his bag. No forced entry, he said. The door was locked. Window too high. No broken glass. Slack paced. So, either she locked herself in after drinking poison, or someone else locked it after. Marple finished. Slack's jaw tightened. That's not possible, unless they had a key. Mason cleared his throat. There are 2 station keys, he said. One on me, one spare in the office. Slack turned to him. Was the spare there this morning? I didn't check, Mason admitted. Slack's voice sharpened. Then check, now. Mason left quickly. Slack picked up the watch again. Running backwards, he muttered. Never seen anything like it. Marple smiled faintly. It's been tampered with. Someone moved the hands and altered the gear. Slack gave her a sideways look. You sound sure. It's not the first time. I've seen a clock used as a false witness, she said. Dolly crossed her arms. But why bother? To create an alibi, Marple said. If the time of death looks different, the suspect may appear innocent. Slack rubbed his temple. This is getting complicated. Haydock pointed at the flask. Poison's simple. Getting in and out unseen is not. Slack nodded. No one saw anyone enter. No one saw anyone leave. The room was silent for a moment. Only the faint tick of the backwards watch filled the air. Slack's eyes narrowed. All right, if they had a key, we'll find them. If they didn't, then... The door opened. Mason returned, his face pale. Slack faced him. Well? Mason hesitated. The spare key's gone. Slack's voice was low. Gone? Yes, not in the hook. I checked twice. Marple's eyes brightened. Then someone planned this carefully. Mason looked at the inspector. If they planned it, he said slowly, then explained the footprints. They led to the fence. Sergeant Lake crouched on the gravel. The marks were clear. Bicycle tires, 2 lines in the dust. He followed them along the edge of the platform. The tires swerved near the station wall, then stopped. He looked closer. Footprints, 1 set, heavy soles. Lake traced them with his eyes. They went straight to the fence, at the end of the yard, then vanished. He walked to the fence. The top rail was scraped, fresh marks in the paint. Lake ran a finger along it. A few wood splinters came away. Something had been lifted over. He stepped back, measured the distance to the ground. Too high for an easy jump with a bicycle. Someone had carried it across. Slack walked up behind him. "Find something." Lake pointed at the scrape. "Bike went over here." Slack frowned. "Why not use the gate?" "Gate's locked," Lake said. "Only staff have keys." Slack crossed his arms. "That narrows it down." Lake walked around the fence, to the other side. The ground was soft. Tire marks, again. The bike had landed and been wheeled away. He followed the trail a few yards. It joined the lane that ran past the goods yard. Then it disappeared into harder ground. Lake returned to the fence. He looked at the footprints again. Same boots as before. No second set. He called to Slack. 1 person, on foot before, on the bike, after. Slack nodded. "Could be our killer leaving the station." Lake scanned the area. "No sign of a struggle," he said. "Quick job." Slack glanced toward the station building. Locked door, missing key, and now this. Lake agreed. Matches the timing, too. Whoever it was, they didn't hang around. Slack stepped closer to the fence. Only staff had keys. Mason, Holly, the ticket clerk, and me. Lake raised an eyebrow, or someone who got hold of one. Slack gave him a look. "You think it was stolen?" "I think it wasn't borrowed," Lake said. They walked back toward the platform. Lake kept his eyes on the ground. Small bits of gravel stuck to the boot prints. The size was average. Nothing to identify them by. Slack muttered under his breath. "Not much to go on." Lake shook his head. "It's enough. The fence tells the story." Slack stopped. "Tell me." Lake pointed again. "They carried the bike over. That means they didn't want to be seen using the gate. That's the move of someone who shouldn't be here at all." Slack stared at the scrape in the wood. "And we'll find them." Lake looked toward the station. "Only staff had keys," Slack said again. Lake muttered, "Or someone who took one." 1 key was missing. Jack Hawley stood by the ticket counter, his cap pushed back. He avoided looking at Inspector Slack. Slack held up the spare key ring. "This hook was empty this morning." Hawley shrugged. "First I've heard of it." Slack's voice was firm. "You're telling me you didn't notice?" "I wasn't in the office," Hawley said. "I was on the platform most of the morning." Sergeant Lake stood behind Slack, arms folded, eyes fixed on Hawley. Dolly Bantry stepped closer. She tilted her head. "I saw you late last night, Jack." Hawley looked at her quickly. "Where?" "By the goods yard," Dolly said. "You had your bike with you." Hawley's mouth tightened. "Wasn't me. I was home." Slack took a step toward him. "You're sure about that?" Hawley nodded. "Dead sure." Slack leaned on the counter. "You had access to the spare key." Hawley shook his head. "I didn't touch it." Lake spoke up. "Anyone else could have?" "Not without me knowing," Hawley said. He ran a hand over the back of his neck. Slack watched him. "You seem nervous." Hawley's eyes narrowed. "I don't like being accused. Dolly's voice stayed calm. No one's accused you yet. Feels like it, Holly muttered. Slack placed the keyring on the counter. Keys don't just vanish. Someone took it, used it, put it back, or planned to. Holly stayed silent. Slack straightened. I'll ask once more. Did you take it? No, Holly said flatly. Slack nodded, slowly. Then we'll search your things. Holly's jaw moved. You've got no right. I've got every right, Slack said. This is a police investigation. A woman's dead. Holly looked away. He tapped his fingers on the counter. That's not on me. Lake's voice was steady. You work here. You had the opportunity. Holly gave a short laugh, without humor. So did half the station staff. Slack took a half step forward. I'll make this simple. You can cooperate, or we can make it official. Holly met his eyes. You think I'm your man? I think you're hiding something, Slack said. Dolly leaned on the counter. Why not just let them check? If you're clean, it ends here. Holly looked between them, his hands clenched. He took a breath. Slack didn't move. He waited. Holly finally said, Search if you want, but you're wasting your time. Lake pulled out a notebook. Where were you between 5 and 6 this morning? Holly hesitated. At home, sleeping. Anyone confirm that? Lake asked. No, Holly admitted. Slack nodded. Then you'd better hope. The search says the same. Holly's eyes hardened. He leaned forward, slightly. You're looking at the wrong man, he said. Her bills were fake. Miss Marple stood in the small front room. The air was stale. Stacks of papers covered the table. She opened the top drawer. Household accounts. Receipts. Invoices. She picked up one. The paid stamp was clear and red. She held it near the lamp. The color began to fade. She frowned. Vanishing ink. In seconds, the stamp was pale. She checked another. Same thing. The red letters dissolved into the paper. Miss Marple set them down. She opened a leather-bound ledger. Neat handwriting. Filled the pages. Some figures had been written over. The pen strokes were heavier in certain places. She ran a finger over the ink, still slightly raised. Recent changes. At the back she found an earlier entry, same date, as a recent page, but the amounts didn't match. She closed the ledger. Someone had been adjusting the records. She looked around the room. Cupboards stood against the wall. Inside were tins of tea, sugar, and flour. One tin was lighter than it should be. She opened it. Inside, rolled papers tied with string. More receipts. Some with no stamps at all. Miss Marple laid them out, in rows. A pattern emerged. The forged ones were all recent. The older ones were genuine. She made a small note on a slip of paper, then returned the items to the tin. She moved to the hall. A coat hung on the peg. In the pocket, she found a folded letter. It was addressed to Mrs. Montgring. The handwriting matched the ledger entries. Marple looked at the date. Last week. She opened it. A polite demand for repayment. The amount was large. She replaced the letter. Then she walked back into the sitting room. She knelt beside a box on the floor. Inside were sewing materials, cotton reels, needles, a small velvet pouch. She tipped the pouch over. Buttons and pins spilled out. Among them was a single gold coin. She picked it up, turned it over, an old sovereign. She set it aside. Her eyes moved to a black veil, draped over a chair. The edge was frayed. She lifted it. The fabric was light. At one corner, a thread stuck out. She touched it. It came away easily. The end was rough. Torn. Miss Marple held it up to the light. It was white, not part of the veil's original weave. She turned it between her fingers. A different texture. A clue. She slipped the thread into her bag. Her eyes narrowed. It didn't belong there. She was never married. Colonel Bantry stood in the parish office. The vicar placed a heavy register on the desk. "This is the marriage book," he said. Bantry opened it. The pages were old, edges worn. He turned to the year given on the death certificate. Halfway down the page, the name appeared. Edith Gring. Bantry traced the letters with his finger. The ink was faded, but legible. He frowned. The handwriting was neat, until her name. The strokes, heavier. The spacing, off. He turned the page. The stitching along the spine looked new. One section had been sewn back in with fresh thread. He looked up at the vicar. "Who stitched this?" "Not me," the vicar said. "It's been like that since I came here." Bantry ran his finger along the seam. The tension in the stitching changed halfway, tighter, on the altered section. He flipped back to the start of the page, compared the handwriting. 2 different hands. He pointed to the earlier entries. "These are consistent." Then he pointed to Edith Gring's. "This one isn't." The vicar peered over. "Yes, the style's wrong. The letters lean differently." Bantry closed the book halfway. If this was added later, then the marriage never took place here. The vicar nodded slowly. "That would be my guess." Bantry made a note. He wrote the name Edith Gring in his notebook. Then he paused. He looked back at the vicar. "Do you have any record of Edith Porter?" The vicar walked to a shelf, pulled out an older register. He opened it, turned several pages. He tapped a line. "There, Edith Porter, baptism record, same year, same date of birth." Bantry leaned closer. The handwriting matched the rest of the book. It was genuine. So Gring was an invention, he said. The vicar shrugged. "Seems so." Bantry closed the books carefully. He handed them back, then stepped into the lane. Inspector Slack was waiting by the gate. "Well?" Slack asked. Bantry took out his notebook. "No marriage here. The page was restitched. Her name added later, and she wasn't Edith Gring at all." Slack raised an eyebrow. "What was she then?" "Edith Porter," Bantry said. "Same birth date, same parish. Everything matches." Slack whistled under his breath. "So the widowess wasn't a widow?" "Correct," Bantry said. "And she lied about who she was." Slack put his hands in his pockets. "People lie for reasons, some small, some dangerous." Bantry looked at him. "Which do you think this was?" Slack's mouth tightened. "Then who was she hiding from?" he said. They were sovereigns. Gold. Inspector Slack tipped the tin onto the table. 5 coins rolled out. Old, heavy. He picked one up, held it to the light. The shine, still there. Miss Marple stood nearby. "Real?" she asked. Slack nodded. "Absolutely." He turned the coin over. Date stamped on the edge. 1898. Slack looked at the tin. Plain, no label, no dust on the lid. "These weren't hidden long," he said. Sergeant Lake came in. He carried a small notebook. "Report from town," Lake said. "Dealer says Holly's been selling coins like these." Slack's eyes narrowed. "How many?" 3 in the past month, Lake said. "All sovereigns." Miss Marple glanced at Slack. So he had access to the source. "Looks like it," Slack replied. Slack put the coins back in the tin, closed the lid, firmly. "Where is he now?" "In the yard," Lake said. They walked out. Holly stood near the goods office, hands in his pockets, eyes darting. Slack stopped in front of him. "You didn't mention the coins." Holly frowned. "What coins?" "These," Slack said. He held up the tin. Holly looked at it, shook his head. "Never seen it before." Lake stepped forward. "Dealer says you sold 3, just like these." Holly's face tightened. "That's different." "Not to me," Slack said. Holly shifted his weight. "They weren't stolen." "Then where did you get them?" Slack asked. Holly didn't answer. Slack's tone sharpened. You're in this up to your neck. Coins don't just appear, and this woman had them in her house. Holly's jaw moved. He looked away. It's not what you think. Slack pressed him. Then make me think something else. Holly's hands came out of his pockets. You want the truth? Yes, Slack said. Holly glanced around. No one close enough to hear. I didn't kill her. I didn't say you did, Slack replied. But you knew her coins were worth something, and you sold them. Holly took a step back. I only passed them on. To who? Slack asked. Holly hesitated. His shoulders tensed. Finally, he said, ask Green. He planned it. He knew everything about her. Miss Marple stood at the door. Tobias Green opened it. Tall, thin, hair neatly combed. Miss Marple, he said, his voice smooth. What can I do for you? I was hoping to ask a few questions, she said. He stepped aside. Come in. The room was tidy. Shelves lined the wall, books, small jars, neat stacks of envelopes. You were the postal clerk here for many years, she said. 35, Green replied. I knew everyone. She nodded. Then you knew Mrs. Gring. I did, he said. Collected her pension, saw her every week. Marple glanced at the shelves. Her eyes paused on a small glass jar. Inside, round pink sweets, pear drops. You must have known a great deal about her, she said. Green smiled faintly. Routine things, address, habits. Did she have visitors? Not often, Green said. She kept to herself. Marple looked at the jar again. Those sweets, she said casually. A favorite? Green followed her gaze. I like them, he said. They keep the mouth from drying. She nodded slowly. I noticed a similar scent at the station. This morning. Green's expression stayed calm. Did you? Marple tilted her head. It came from a silver flask. For the first time. His eyes shifted away. Only for a second, then back. Lots of people carry flasks, he said. Yes, she agreed, but few carry pear drops in liquid form. Green's mouth tightened. He walked to the shelf, picked up the jar, shook it. The sweets rattled. Harmless, he said. Of course, she replied. There was a pause. She glanced at the envelopes, all addressed in the same careful hand. Ink fresh, on some. You handled her letters? I handled everyone's, he said. It was my job. And her finances? She trusted me with small deposits, he said. Nothing unusual. Marple's voice stayed even. She is dead now. Green set the jar down. Yes, he said. I heard. She was found with that flask beside her. Unfortunate, Green said. An accident, perhaps. Perhaps, Marple repeated. She took her bag from the chair. He walked her to the door. As he opened it, he said quietly, People die every day, Miss Marple. They met in the dark. Sergeant Lake crouched behind a stack of crates. The goods yard was quiet. Cold air moved through the open space. He checked his watch. Just past midnight. Two shadows appeared at the far gate. One pushed a bicycle. Lake recognized Jack Holly. The second man walked beside him, taller, thin, Tobias Green. They stopped near the shed. Holly set the bike against the wall. Green opened his coat. Lake moved closer, kept low. Holly reached into his pocket, brought out a small cloth bag, handed it to Green. Green loosened the string, poured the contents into his hand. Coins caught the faint light. Gold. He weighed them in his palm, nodded once. Green reached inside his coat again, took out an envelope, passed it to Holly. Lake could see notes inside. Cash. Lake tapped his signal torch, twice. From the other side of the yard, Inspector Slack moved in. Police! Slack shouted. Holly froze. Green stepped back. Slack reached Holly first, grabbed his arm, pulled the envelope from his hand. Holly stammered, "It's not what you think." Slack opened the cloth bag. Sovereigns gleamed inside. "It's exactly what I think," Slack said. Lake circled behind, cut off any escape toward the lane. Green stayed still, hands at his sides. Then, as Slack turned to show the coins to Lake, Green moved. He darted toward the far gate. Lake lunged after him, missed, by inches. "Stop!" Lake shouted. Green didn't slow, slipped through a gap between crates. Lake followed, too narrow. By the time he reached the open yard beyond, Green was already at the fence, one leg over, dropped down the other side. Lake climbed after him, hit the ground running, but Green had a head start. The sound of his footsteps faded into the dark. Lake slowed, scanned the road, empty. He walked back to the goods yard. Slack still had Holly by the arm. "You let him go?" Slack demanded. "He was too fast," Lake said, and he knew the way out. Slack's face was tight. "We'll get him, but Holly stays in custody." Holly shook his head. "You've got the wrong man." "You were selling stolen coins," Slack said. "That's enough for me." Lake picked up the bicycle, worn leather saddle, mud on the tires, fresh. Slack turned to the constable at the gate. "Take him to the station." Holly didn't resist, but his jaw was set. As the constable led him away, Lake looked toward the fence. Green was gone, lost in the night. It wasn't lint. It was a clue. Miss Marple sat at her kitchen table. The small white thread lay in front of her. She held it with tweezers. The texture was coarse, not cotton, not wool. She reached for the black veil, taken from the widow's house, laid it flat on the table, ran her fingers along the edge. Most stitching, intact, but at one corner, frayed. The weave was broken. She held the thread beside the fray. The color didn't match. The veil's thread was black. This one, white. She picked up her magnifying glass, studied the frayed corner. The black stitching was cut cleanly, not torn by wear. She thought of the station window, the one high on the wall, in the ladies' waiting room. The frame had a small gap at the latch. She imagined a string looped through the gap, pulled from outside. The latch lifted. The veil could have been caught in the string, a white cord, thin enough to slip through. The thread in front of her matched that idea. She set the veil aside, took the thread to the sink, ran water over it. The fibers stayed tight, synthetic, durable enough to hold weight. She dried it, placed it back on the table. Her eyes narrowed. The window latch could be worked that way, without entering first. Then the killer could step inside, unlock the door from within. She remembered the missing spare key. The string could have opened the window, just enough to reach in, unlock from inside. She pictured the sequence. Victim seated, flask offered, poison taken. The killer leaves, through the window or door, locks behind, with the spare key. She picked up her notebook, wrote, "String plus spare key equals entry plus exit." She tapped the pen against the page. The backward running watch, the footprints ending at the fence, the bicycle, it all fitted a plan. Miss Marple leaned back. The thread was the link between the locked room and the outside escape. A detail so small, most would overlook it. She placed it in a small envelope, wrote "Evidence" on the front, set it in her bag. She would need to show it to Inspector Slack. It might be the piece. That proved the killer's method. She spoke aloud to the empty room. "That's how he got in. 5:35, 5:47. Dr. Haydock stood by the desk in the station office. Inspector Slack, Sergeant Lake, Miss Marple, all listened. Haydock opened his notebook. "These are the times that matter," he said. He pointed at the first line. 5:35, ingestion. Slack raised an eyebrow. You're certain? Yes, Haydock said, based on stomach content temperature and chemical traces. He tapped the second line. 5:47. Death. Lake frowned. 12 minutes? Cyanide works fast, Haydock said. In this dose, it shuts down the system in minutes. Slack leaned back. So the killer had to be with her at 5:35. Exactly, Haydock said, which makes the alibi crucial. Marple nodded. And the watch? Haydock took the backward-running watch from the desk. This was set to confuse us. If someone saw her alive and looked at this, they'd believe the time was different. Slack's eyes narrowed. Different enough to put the suspect somewhere else? Yes, Haydock said. They could appear to be away, when in fact, they were right here. Lake looked at the watch. Who would think of that? Someone careful, Marple said, and someone who knows how we work. Slack drummed his fingers on the desk, so we prove the times are false, and the alibi collapses. Haydock nodded. We also have the poison, the flask, and the thread from the veil. It shows entry and exit. Slack stood. Then we've got enough to move. Marple raised a hand. Not yet. Slack frowned. Why not? Marple leaned forward. We need him to confirm the link himself. Lake tilted his head. You mean a confession? No, Marple said. A slip. Something only the killer would know. Slack crossed his arms. How do you plan to get that? Marple smiled faintly. Set the stage. Make him believe we've missed a detail. He'll correct us. They always do. Haydock closed his notebook. He won't talk if he feels cornered. Exactly, Marple said. He must think. He's safe. Slack considered. And we bait him with? Marple glanced at the tin of coins on the desk. That, she said. It's his weakness. He won't leave them. Lake nodded slowly. We offer a chance for him to move the last ones. Slack exhaled. A sting. Precisely, Marple said. And we'll be there to watch every move. Slack looked at Lake. Get the men ready, quietly. Lake picked up his hat, left the room. Haydock packed his things. We'll need to time it right, he said. Marple rose from her chair. We will. She met Slack's eyes. We'll let him trap himself. One more coin sale. Inspector Slack stood near the corner of the market yard. Sergeant Lake waited on the opposite side. 2 constables, hidden by the gate. Tobias Green walked in. A small leather bag hung from his hand. He looked around once. Slack watched him cross to a man near the stalls. The man, a plainclothes constable. Green opened the bag. Coins glinted inside. The constable leaned in. Green spoke quietly. Slack stepped forward. Morning, Mr. Green. Green turned sharply. His face stayed calm. Inspector, selling something? Slack asked. Old coins, Green said. Found them in a box. Slack took the bag, weighed it, opened it. 5 gold sovereigns, mint condition. Found them where? Slack asked. In my shed, Green said. Been there for years. Slack's tone was flat. Funny. Mrs. Gring had coins just like these. Green shrugged. Not my concern. Lake came up beside Slack. Dealer says you've sold more of these lately. Green's eyes didn't move. I sell what I find. Slack stepped closer. You found them the same week she died? Green's mouth tightened. Coincidence? Slack looked at Lake. Search his place. Green's voice sharpened. You've no warrant. We have cause, Slack said. The constables moved in. Green stayed still. Slack kept his eyes on him. You've been careful, but not careful enough. Green smiled faintly. You think I killed her for a handful of coins? Slack didn't answer. You think too small, Inspector, Green said. Explain it to me, Slack replied. Green looked away. They were wasted with her, locked away, doing nothing. Slack's voice stayed even. Still doesn't make them yours. Green's tone hardened. She owed me years of small favors. I kept her affairs in order. Slack folded his arms. And then? Green paused. She wasn't as grateful as she should have been. Slack leaned in. You mean she found out? Green's jaw worked. She wouldn't have gone to the police. Slack's eyes narrowed. You were willing to risk it. Green gave a small shrug. I didn't risk anything. Miss Marple stepped forward from behind the gate. Her voice was calm. And the flask. He broke. Tobias Green sat in the small interview room. Inspector Slack stood over him. Miss Marple sat to the side. Sergeant Lake waited by the door. Green's hands rested flat on the table. His shoulders were tense. Slack spoke first. She's dead because of you. Green didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the wall. Marple leaned forward. She trusted you, Mr. Green, and you poisoned her. Green's jaw tightened. I didn't want to. Slack's voice was sharp. But you did. Green's eyes flicked to the tin of coins on the table. She found out about the money, about the bills. She said she'd tell. Marple's voice was quiet. So you silenced her. Green looked down. She left the house that morning. I followed her to the station. She was early. No one else was there. Slack stepped closer. And you had the spare key. Green nodded once. I let myself in before she arrived. Through the yard door, left it on the latch. Then I waited outside. Lake's voice was low. And the flask? Green's hands moved slightly. I filled it the night before. Water, sugar, a little pear drop essence, enough to hide the cyanide. Marple's eyes narrowed. Where did you get that? Chemicals from the farm shed, Green said. Came in handy for killing pests. Slack's voice was flat. You handed it to her? She took it herself, Green said. I told her it was mine. Said she could have a sip while she waited for the train. She didn't suspect a thing. Lake asked, and after? She drank, started to cough. I helped her sit down. Marple's gaze stayed on him. You left through the window. Green nodded. I'd tied a cord to the latch earlier. Pulled it open from outside. That's where her veil caught on it. Left the thread. Slack's voice was tight. You locked the door behind you. With the spare key, Green said. Then I took the bike, over the fence, straight to my shed. Left the key where it was before. Lake folded his arms. And the watch? Green gave a faint smile. Turned the hands. Adjusted the gears. Anyone checking would think the time of death was later. My alibi stayed clean. Slack shook his head. All for a few gold coins. Green's voice was firm. She was going to ruin me, everything I'd built here, all for the sake of pride. Marple's voice was soft. She was never married, Mr. Green. That wasn't your shame to use. Green looked away. I don't regret taking the money, only being caught. Slack signaled to Lake. Take him. Lake put the cuffs on. Green didn't resist. As they let him out, Dolly Bantry, standing in the doorway, asked quietly, But why live a lie? Some lies are armor. Miss Marple sat with Dolly Bantry in the drawing room. The case was over. Tobias Green, in custody. Dolly poured tea. Still can't believe it, she said. A widow, who wasn't a widow at all. Marple stirred her cup. She became one on paper. A widow is respected, left alone, not questioned. Dolly frowned. So it was just to keep people away. Marple nodded. In small villages, gossip travels fast. An unmarried woman, past a certain age, is a subject of talk. A widow avoids it. Dolly leaned back, and no one checked the marriage record. No one had reason to, Marple said, until the stitching was examined. Dolly glanced toward the window, And Green found out. He did, Marple said. He also found her savings, the coins, the altered bills. He used his position at the post office to keep her accounts looking proper. Dolly's voice was quiet. She trusted him. Yes, Marple said. And when she threatened to expose him, he decided she had to go. Dolly shook her head. All for money. Greed rarely stops at enough, Marple said. He was already taking. The coins were simply more than he could resist. Dolly looked down at her cup. And the watch? That was clever. Clever, Marple agreed. But tricks often unravel. The thread from her veil was enough to show how he entered and left, without breaking a lock. Dolly sighed. I suppose she wasn't an easy woman. Marple's voice was even. She lived on her own terms. The lie gave her space to do so. Dolly gave a small smile. Some lies are armor. Marple nodded again. Yes, and armor is worn to keep wounds away. She didn't hurt anyone by it, but she met someone who used that armor against her. They sat in silence for a moment. The clock on the mantel ticked. Dolly set her cup down. It's strange, she said. The truth always comes out, but it doesn't always make things better. Marple looked at her. Sometimes it simply changes the shape of the hurt. Dolly's eyes moved to the garden outside. She had a whole life we didn't know, and now she's gone. We know it all, but I don't feel wiser for it. Marple's tone was soft. Knowing is not the same as understanding. Dolly nodded slowly. I suppose not. They sat without speaking. The tea cooled. Footsteps passed outside in the lane. Dolly looked at Marple again. And Green. What happens to him now? He will have a trial, Marple said, and the rest of his life to consider whether the coins were worth it. Dolly gave a small sigh. I doubt he'll think so. Marple reached for her bag. I expect not. Dolly glanced at the empty teacup. The truth, she said, isn't always kind.